Absolutely. And, as I've grown into the person that I am, I have had some differences of opinion with my lifestyle choices, some of them, and what my parents would prefer that I be. But at the end of the day, it's they've loved me and they have been there for me and supported me like enormously through the processes. And at the end of the day, they recognize it's my life and they respect that.
I think the minute I stepped on a practice field for rugby, the calling happened.
An 8-year plan to be on the team, and I was in it within 2 years.
Don't wait until you are a pro to be a pro, right?
Like, I like doing something, stopping and learning from it.
Like, it just looked like it was a heavy hit.
To give up, it's not up.
That's the first time I played like professionally.
I'm making rugby money. How can I make money outside of it?
And there's two Scottish guys, and they said, "Oh, you're here for the movie."
Rugby is a sport where that's often coupled with actually having a good time.
He looked at me and he says, "You guys are awesome."
Roll rugby, roll rugby, roll rugby, roll rugby, roll rugby, roll rugby, let's go to rock.
Yo, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another great episode of Grow Rugby. My name is GiftTime Bailu, and this is the show where we speak to people about the opportunities they have found, created, or taken advantage of via rugby. Yes, I am back from Mexico, so hence everything becomes late and off time, but we're gonna get there. But unfortunately, as a result, we have a little bit of a guest little delay. We had Robbie Owens, Squid Rugby last week, and, now we got a little bit of a break, and I have to come back. But as a result, though, you're lucky, I got throwbacks, and I'm going to hit you guys with the throwback, and this was one of the great ones we did with Phaidra Knight. It was a few years back, still relevant, more so because of knowing who she is and how far she's come in this time with PSK Collective. If you guys don't already know, World Rugby Hall of Famer, PSK Collective founder, HBCU alumni, USA Rugby great and now Hall of Famer, ironically after the World Rugby Hall of Fame, when it definitely should have been before, but whatever, semantics and all that good stuff. And just a speaker, just multi-talented athlete coming straight off of self-development and, big supporter HBCU Rugby Classic in the realest way. So I've been wanting to post this one up for a minute, but, sometimes you just don't get the opportunity to do what you want to until everything calls for it. So this is a great interview. I had a lot of fun with it. Again, this is back in the day. It's actually one of the earliest times of me really getting to know Phaidra at her best. And, you guys are going to like this one. If you guys don't know the backstory, the real backstory, then this one will be able to do it. And if you do know it, then you guys get to have a nostalgic comparison, because I think at this time she was just getting ready to start coaching. And this is just before everything just started blowing up with her. She was doing NBC and everything like that. So, guys, I hope you guys enjoy it. Please, of course, I forgot to tell you, please don't forget to subscribe. Hit that like button. Throw the notification. If you're listening on the podcast, definitely subscribe on to and tell your friends a little bit about this, because I appreciate it. And if you could, please leave a comment on Apple Podcasts. I don't think you can do it on Spotify or literally anywhere else that you guys can put it, but definitely at least Apple Podcasts, because it helps with credibility, and I want to be able to keep bringing you guys more and more stuff, especially as the Olympics is coming up. So I hope you guys enjoy this. I know you're going to love it. The legend, the GOAT, a friend, and definitely one of the biggest supporters of rugby out here, Phaidra S. Knight.
Roll rugby, 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 let's go to rock.
Well, Phaidra, again, I want to say thank you. I know, again, you're busy with your multiple lives that you have going on, by the way.
God, it's insane. I don't know what's wrong with me, but it's like an addiction. I have to be completely inundated with stuff in order to feel like a human being. So
let it's that weird point where it's like, do you have space? Yes, no, this isn't right. All right, we need to fill it up. We got to put the sand in there. Take it off.
So true. So true.
So, kind of just, starting off, how did you get started with rugby? I know this is well known, but for me, it's still been little bits and pieces. So how did you get started with rugby?
So my love for football and the contact game started when I was a kid. I was actually 5 years old, and I would see like the midget league football players playing football, and my sister was a cheerleader. She's 4 years older than me, and so there was at that time I lived in rural Georgia. Girls weren't really allowed. It wasn't socially acceptable for girls to play football with the boys, certainly not in any organized league. And so I decided I'd be a cheerleader. I was the biggest tomboy you could imagine. But I decided, you know what, I'll be a cheerleader, and then maybe I can play football sometimes. They'll let me come out on the field. Well, that never happened. But what did happen was at the end of season football party, I got a chance to play football with the boys because it was just kind of an open thing. And I ran all over them. Like, it was crazy. I was the fastest one there, ran all over them, or one of the fastest ones there. And so my obsession with actually playing contact football started as a kid. And I continued on. I ended up finding basketball as my first love. So I played basketball. I continued on. I had a next door neighbor named JP. He was 4 years older than me too. And so I would he was such a good sport because I would go down and ask JP to play with me for 2 hours. And his mom would make him just to get him out of the house. So when I was in 5th grade and he was in ninth, actually he was in 9th grade.
Oh wow! So he was really older. It wasn't even a little bit. He was your sister's age then, right?
Yeah. He and my sister were in the same grade. So when I was in 5th grade, he was in 9th grade. I said, "Hey, let's play football." So we went out. We played tackle football, and I tackled him so hard. This day he broke his arm.
Oh man!
So he never lived it down. Still doesn't. And I knew at that point, okay, I should probably do something with this. But it was always basketball until I got to law school. And when I got to law school, University of Wisconsin, I was actually, I didn't play basketball in undergraduate college, but I wanted to, reacquaint myself with team sports. And so law school is such like medical school. It's just a very rigorous and hard thing. And so I needed a balance. And so during my second semester, my first year, I decided, you know what, I'm going to train. I have a year of eligibility, NCAA varsity eligibility left. I'm going to train and walk onto the Badgers basketball team. I'm strong. I'm stronger than I was. I'm quick. I can, I think I can do it. Right. So I started training, and I ended up party and met a lady who played rugby. And by the way, I'd never even heard of rugby. Didn't know what rugby was, but she introduced herself and said, "Hey, you look athletic. Would you be interested in playing rugby?" And I'm like, "What is rugby?" She's like, "It's like football with no pads." And I'm like, "This could be interesting." So I ended up haphazardly the next week. She told me where they practiced, and I was in the area. I just happened to be in the area. Decided I'd stop by, and I just jumped into a practice and I fell in love with it. And from that point on, it was rugby and, basketball, what? So, yeah, I ended up falling in love with it and playing. And this was the Wisconsin women's rugby team that I ended up playing with. So,
That's awesome. It's funny because, especially within football, it always seems to be essentially the main few states that consistently always have great athletes. You have Florida with the speed athletes. You have California with the throwers, you have Georgia with all the runners, and then you have Louisiana. And so it's hilarious that, you being a Georgian, and being able to be that athletic, it just seems natural now. Is sports something that has been a component of your family? I know you said your sister was a cheerleader, but were your parents athletes as well too?
It's funny. My dad was an athlete. I had an uncle who was a really good basketball player, and so I think I derived my talent from him. And I would always, I'd spent even as I grew up on a farm, so I grew up working, so I knew, I knew what hard work was. So that component I had pretty much down packed from growing up my environment, right? Again, I was the polar opposite of my sister. So she was very in the house, wasn't really athletic. She did cheerleading, but it was very brief. And I was outside driving tractors at age 5 with my dad. I love basketball. I watched, I grew up on the LA Lakers, James Worthy, Magic Johnson, AC Green, Larry Bird, Kevin McHale. So I grew up watching basketball, and I watched a lot, and I was very athletic. I watched, and then I'd take what I watched out to the court.
Right.
My dad had built me a makeshift basketball court in one of our pea fields. We grew peas, and so he put a goal up at the end of one, and he gave me that space to create a basketball court. So I went out pretty much every day, shot the hoops, watched, and so I learned, by watching it, professionals, and then coming back and putting it to action on the court. But I played a lot by myself.
Right.
My uncle would play with me, when he could, when he had time. My dad was, I think he played baseball a little bit in high school, and he was a golfer. Mm-hmm. He actually had the ability, if he had taken it seriously, to probably have gone pro. He was good. He was pretty good. My mother wasn't much of an athlete, and as she, she was kind of a late bloomer. I think when she was probably in her late 30s, early 40s, she took up running. She started jogging, and now at age 69, she runs 8 to 10 miles a day, 5 days a week.
That's insane.
And she was doing it 6 days a week until I encouraged her and talked to her about the power and importance of recovery.
Right.
So she reduced it to just 5 days a week, but. My dad was pretty athletic. My mom was, a late bloomer and a hard worker. But I think I got my genetics from probably somewhere else. My dad maybe. I'm just very dedicated, and I'm resilient. I'm just used to working hard. And so when I put my mind to something, I just do it. So I don't know if it's that I'm so talented, but I have a good work ethic. And so...
it sounds like, again, there's such an organic inclination. Just by the factor of working on a farm, and we know, a lot of people know, definitely living here in Louisiana, you learn that there's just being on the farm is, honest to God, one of the hardest things I've seen. I remember when I used to live in Iowa, and they used to have us try and pull the stalks off of corn. As a job, and that was the worst thing. Just terrible for the hand and the body, and then you're doing it at 13, 14 years old. You're like, why am I doing this for this below minimum wage? But I don't know better because I just want money. But
exactly,
it's that process, and then doing it in Georgia heat.
Yes, so we would gather vegetables. Gather in season for peas, butter beans, okra, and even corn was when the heat was at its highest, right? Yeah. So we'd wake up at 5 a.m. pretty much every weekday morning, and I had my older sister and I. My dad and my mom were leaders by example, so they would join us. So it wasn't like they just had us go out, and they created this farm environment. My dad was just a jack of all trades, so he enjoyed farming. He was college educated and did other things. He was an insurance salesman, but he really enjoyed that, and they wanted to create a way for us to learn real work ethic. They grew up, in a time where my mom picked cotton. Her dad was a farmer in South Georgia, and my dad's father, farmed a lot, lived on farmland, and so he grew up working hard like that. So they wanted to instill in us that work ethic, but also push us to go to college and be independent women.
Right.
And so, you're right. Like it was hot. It was hard work. But we didn't know any different. That's all we knew. And we knew that we were very different from the other kids in school because the other kids in school didn't do what we did. But, we would complain about it sometimes, but it wasn't like we knew any other life. And so we learned to accept it as being a part of what we did every summer. And, I am so grateful that we had that experience because, it's given me, like I said, the work ethic, to be in it, to be resilient, to endure until I find that successful threshold.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think it's been pretty significant.
No, and I think that makes sense. So, you've gone through Alabama and because you went to Alabama State, correct?
Yes.
All right. So, and then ended up finding yourself in Wisconsin where you started playing rugby. Now, what was that first experience? Well, not so much the first experience, but what was that initial experience of playing with the women in that, in comparison to what you had been doing in high school, and I'm assuming in the small little pickup games, because I would assume that dynamically, what you were getting below the Mason-Dixon line significantly differed than what you were getting in Wisconsin. What was that feeling like?
It was like such a dichotomy. It was extremely different. I'm going from Alabama State University, which is an historically black college, right, in a very warm climate, to an extremely white school, it was maybe 10% minority or less, in a very cold climate. So, I guess it's like the story of my life. It was a tale of two extremes. And quite a difference, right? I'm also going from the South, which is traditionally pretty conservative, and I'm going into an environment although Wisconsin, the state of Wisconsin is not necessarily a very liberal and progressive state. The city of Madison, Wisconsin, is pretty progressive, and so I'm going from an extremely conservative, living environment. And area of the country to a very progressive one. And so I initially, I've always embraced different. There's always, I think, I was born with that, knowing that I wasn't like the people necessarily like that I was around, and that I wanted to explore and experience the world and different cultures and different everything, right? And so I embraced it eventually. I was a little bit in my comfort zone to start, but I embraced it, and I didn't discover rugby until the second semester of law school. But when I met this team, it was just so different, and I didn't quite know what made it so different. But I knew, but what I did feel was included. I felt a sense of inclusion. It didn't matter that I was African American. It didn't matter that I, lifted weights and liked having muscles as a female. It didn't matter, anything. And it was that inclusive, quality that really drew me to rugby, that drew me to Wisconsin women, and so, it was my biggest exposure, honestly, to diversity and sexuality, and that too was it was really cool because I had never been in an environment where sexual orientation was so liberal, and so it didn't matter what you were accepted, and so that was cool within itself, and it actually made me more comfortable to kind of be and explore my own sexuality and who I really who I am and who I was. And so it was just that, again, that overall acceptance and inclusion that were just so powerful, that was amazing.
Hey guys, I just want to take a quick moment to talk to you about the Rugby Outlet Mall. Now, I know you guys have heard me talk about this many times in the show before, typically in the intro, but I wanted to really make sure to get your focus on it because the Rugby Outlet Mall is not just the commerce hub for GiftTime Rugby, but it is an area where we want to be able to create the movement and the symbolic elements that add to the movement. The Rugby Outlet Mall is here so that we can have something that not just to have for the field, but more importantly to be able to have as a regular lifestyle. Because as you know, rugby is not just a sport. It's a whole way of life. It is a movement. And we have everything moving from cultural to your pop culture items like our Rugby Zon shirts and sweaters, as well as representing for the culture as we continue to develop the HBCU Rugby Classic. And we want to continue to support these things because it only grows the sport overall. We are continually growing to be able to make sure that we're connecting with you on a personal level as well as a rugby level. And for you guys that are listening to the podcast and listening to this show, want to let you know that you are going to get 20% off all gear that is under the category of GiftTime Rugby Network and the HBCU Rugby Classic. That is basically the entire store. And all you need to use is promo code GREAUX, GREAUX Rugby. And with that, you guys will get 20% off any clothing that is in the store as of right now. And of course, we're always building up more and more each time. But we want to make sure that you are able to symbolize your rugby faithfulness to the rest of the world and let them know that there is an opportunity to be able to develop, to grow, and to get better each and every time in this sport. So guys, I hope you guys check it out. Definitely go, and you guys can go to www.rugbyoutletmall.com. That is rugbyoutletmall.com. Guys, you're not going to want to miss one bit of this. Now let's get back to it.
It was just amazing.
And I can believe it because I know, whenever you start that suffocating feeling, well, I guess the word suffocating because I don't know if you always realize it until you realize that there's something different.
That's it. You don't know any different. So growing up in the South and always being exposed, although I knew, my family, my parents were very, they were very strong in the church and Christian. And so I would frequently get in debates as a little girl with them, about religion even, about this whole idea of, there being, for them, they believe, in Jesus Christ, and that's great, but they believe that that's the only way. And I always thought, I'm like, but there's so many people in this world, how is that the only way when there's so many different people in this world? I can't think that this God has created one way, and there are all these other people in the world that aren't really, firsthand exposed to it, and even the same with my father. I was just so progressive where, during those times, it was just so normal for women not to be equals. Right. It was so normal for men to talk about women in a derogatory way. And he would do that, and I would stand up for it. We would get into these debates, and he totally, it wasn't that he was, I think he was just talking, he was saying things that he had learned, right? This is all stuff he's heard as a kid, and he grows up in that environment. What was really cool is that my parents, although I say I lived in the South and it was conservative and not as inclusive, my family and my parents accepted me, and I was very different. I was not like my sister. I always kind of danced to the beat of my own drum, which was very different from a lot of kids around me. And they accepted it. It was very normal. So although they were very set in their ways in some sense, they let me be, for the most part, who I was and who I wanted to be. And again, I'd get into these debates with my dad about feminism, and he would allow for it, right? My parents were extremely strict, but they allowed for me to, and my sister, if she wanted to explore those themes of, those political themes and those intellectual themes. They didn't really fight us on that. They let us be that. And so mad props to them for being products of such an environment,
right,
but still within themselves being able to allow for that freedom and that expression. So
I mean, it makes sense. You know, it looks like in the work that they're trying to do to create these strong, independent women, the only way you can do it, and especially if you know that environment that happens, you know, in the 60s, 50s, 40s,
right.
And you're like, okay, well, you know what, I can either fight my daughters and say, you know, you need to stick within this box, and we're just repeating what we have before, or I say you guys need to be strong, and then I have to let them actually have a mind.
Exactly. That's it. Yeah.
So that's awesome, and I know that it definitely helps, especially in terms of personal growth too, because
yes,
you know, there's nothing more. It's already a battle enough to be able to say, all right, let me discover myself, let me learn what I'm trying to do, and then also have to battle on the back end the one foundational support that you've had literally your whole entire life.
Absolutely. And, you know, as I've grown into the person that I am, you know, I have had some differences of opinion with my lifestyle choices, some of them, and what my parents would prefer that I be. But at the end of the day, it's they've loved me, and they have been there for me and supported me like enormously through the processes. And at the end of the day, they recognize it's my life, and they respect that. And they, like I said, we don't always see eye to eye, but I don't see eye to eye with my best friends, with the closest people in my life. And that's what makes the world such a beautiful place. The diversity of thought, the diversity of feelings, the diversity of how we live our lives. And so it's okay. It's okay to not agree. It's okay to agree to disagree, you know?
I feel like by the nature of you being a lawyer, you naturally have to be resistant to people anyways.
Sure.
So, I mean, it's like, it's natural. Like, if you were agreeing with more people than not, I feel like, yeah, you might not be in the right profession right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, kind of backtracking a little bit, and it's something that you mentioned. So, you, looking at some of the older YouTube videos, some older pictures, you were a beast mode power lifter, bodybuilder, whatever. Like, I remember looking, I'm like, all right, yeah, I'm never going to be able to get to that point in my life. And I'm jealous. But I was like, but it sounds like that was something that was that something that's always had been natural? Did you always have a very muscular build, or was it something that came during your time at Alabama State?
Nah, you know, I was always an athlete, so I guess on some level I'd always had kind of broad shoulders for my height. And then when I got to when I attended Alabama State, I put away athletics. I started working out a bit, you know, and so I got into a little bit of resistance training while I was there. But by I think my third year of undergrad, I was introduced to bodybuilding. And that was my first exposure to like really working out. And it's interesting because all I wanted to do was go in the gym and lift it, right? Like I had so much anger from growing up, although I grew up with two absolute, you know, parents that I loved so much and would do anything for. It was a tough childhood. We grew up in some pretty rough circumstances, my sister and I. And so I harbored a lot of anger. So all I wanted to do was go in the gym and lift it. But my first exposure to working out was with a bodybuilder. And so he kind of took me under his wing, and bodybuilding lifting is a lot different from powerlifting, obviously.
Right.
So I started doing bodybuilding. I think I did my first competition. It may have been during my senior year, maybe junior year of college. And, you know, it was just my first exposure to dieting, to eating. Like, I always ate decent, I guess, but it was like that was my initial start to like really being aware and conscious about how I eat. Mm-hmm. And so I did a bodybuilding competition, and I never did anything beyond amateur, because anything beyond amateur, particularly especially for women and for that industry, it requires the use of, you know, of unnatural
additional sources.
Yeah, unnatural.
we don't want to throw anybody under the bus, yeah. But you know, it wasn't always so organic.
Exactly. So that wasn't a road I wanted to go down. Yeah. but I really like lifting weights. And what bodybuilding allowed me, or what it was kind of a gateway for me to go in and lift the gym. And so I did that for a couple years, and I really didn't like it because I felt like it was for me, it was this battle of who I really was versus who I had been socialized to be and how ladies were to be, right? Like how ladies in the South were expected to act, and girls or ladies weren't necessarily supposed to go in the gym and lift heavy weight. Ladies weren't supposed to have really, really big muscles unless they were bodybuilders, and those were just freaks. So when I finished up undergrad, I really got into lifting weights. Like I was strong. I mean, I remember when I was, even after law school, I would go in the gym and throw 4 plates on each side and do box squats. Like I was for reps. Like I reached a point where I just wanted to lift weights. And honestly, the fuel that lit my fire was all this anger I had from being a kid. And it was I just circumvented it to lifting weights, And, at that point, even before, graduating law school, I lifted weights. I started playing rugby, and that allowed, for the release a tremendous amount of
perfect storm of energy release to be there.
Perfect. So yeah, I loved lifting weights. I didn't really, and I look back at some pictures, especially when I was in Wisconsin, when my hair was short. I was just kind of growing to myself. There were so many occasions when I would walk into a women's restroom in the airport and get chased down by security because they thought I was a guy.
Wow.
I was that massive.
Wow.
I was 5'4". I was 185 pounds. I looked like a linebacker.
I'm sure you hit 1-2 on the rugby pitch.
You know what? But I never cared about how I looked. I look back and I'm like, whoa, I was a little scary. But I just, at that stage in my life, I was just working it out.
Right.
I was working out. I was having fun, but I was working out a lot of stuff. And so as I contoured into, more of I became a little bit more sophisticated as a rugby player. As you get older, you gotta kind of step away from the weights sometimes. And so, or at least minimize. So as I got older, once I hit my 3rd World Cup, I wasn't in the gym lifting or trying to lift, 400 pounds on my back, right? So that thing started to slow. But yeah, I was just naturally really strong and had a lot of, pent up aggression that I just needed to release. So you go.
But that makes perfect sense. But because look again, let's highlight again. Country strong, okay? Georgia, right? It's in the water,
right?
So I feel like probably for the people whenever he got to Madison and even New York area, or even when they're playing with the national team, everyone's like, "Oh my God, that's crazy!" Yeah, people go down south and you're like, "Well, you know what? I mean, it's that grass-fedness."
You have players now. I look at Hope Rogers, who's a really strong kid, and no disrespect by calling her a kid, but she's young. She's
young. It's okay. You've earned your place.
She's talented and young, but she's strong. And I look at Jamelia Jam. We call her Jam Reinhardt. Ridiculously strong too. And I look at these players and I love them because it's almost, I look back and it's like, God, these are 2 props and this is how my path started. And, I want to talk to them. I want to give them these ways of how, give them indicators and ways of lessons of how they can sustain their strength and how they should best do this and that. So I look at these younger players and it actually makes me really proud that, they're carrying on that legacy, but that having an advantage of being really strong in rugby, it's tremendous. And that's really what I predicated a lot of my career on, is that I was just stronger than a lot of the players I went up against. and I just overpowered them. I had a lot of aggression, and I had no fear. I grew up in kind of a violent situation, and so I didn't have a lot of fear for anything and anyone. So it was a perfect, like you said, it was a perfect storm. Rugby, weightlifting, and advancing in that.
Oh, that's awesome. So, kind of moving forward, what was the process? How did you get from Madison women and to being on the national team, and then obviously, where your rugby legacy has kind of like fully kicked in?
Yeah, so I had no idea until probably 98 that there was a national team. So I'm playing with Wisconsin, and I'm just enjoying, having fun, and I was very competitive, but I wasn't like I was just playing to be the best that I could be, right. just to be the best that I could be, because that's what I've always done. And when I caught wind of there being a national team and that there was some interest from the national team coaches in me, then I started, I stepped it up even another bit, stepped it up a bit. And so I played on, I made various select side teams. I made the Midwest select side, and we would go down to, at that time, I think ITTs was what we used instead of NASC. It was called ITTs, and we'd go to ITTs. It was in Florida at the time. And we'd play. And from there, the national team coaches would select players to invite to national camp. And I had broken my leg in 1998 and broke my ankle, like a terrible dislocation. So I knew that the national team selectors, I was on their radar. I broke my leg in the summer of 98 playing with the Twin City Amazons, and I had to have surgery, and the doctors told me that I probably would never play rugby again. It was such a tremendous break. I had to have, it was crazy. So it was a lot of extensive ligament damage. They told me I wouldn't play. I didn't even listen. I didn't even hear that. All I knew was that I had been invited to camp I'd been invited to ITTs, and that the national team coaches wanted to see me there so that they could decide if they wanted to invite me to national camp. And so my whole goal from August until December was to heal up and get better. So I'm at the gym. I literally was squatting, and this is not smart, but this was my determination. I'm broken in a cast. I'm in the gym in a wheelchair, rolling around because it was an efficient way to get around. I had to have surgery. I was told to elevate. I was told that I couldn't be, I shouldn't be doing anything for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So I'm in the gym the day after I got discharged from the hospital, bench pressing, getting my upper body strength up. And then as soon as they moved me into a walking boot, I started squatting.
Wow.
I started squatting.
You waste no time. God.
I waste no time. And of course I'm going against doctor's orders, but I was I'm going to feel it out, see how it is. I still had stitches, so I think I had stitches at that point. So anyway, I was just determined that I wanted to make this U.S. team, that I needed to be at least able to play a half in Florida. I didn't get cleared. Again, I went down. They were like, "You're not ready." I was doing PT, but I really wasn't ready. I was limping a bit, but I was determined. And so, the coach put me in for a half. He's like, "Okay, we're going to see. I'm going to put you in for a half, let you run around a little bit." At that time, I was playing in the centers.
Right.
So it wasn't like I had to deal with a scrum, front row, or anything.
Right.
So
there's no major consistent direct contact that you're going into each time.
I was just running around and tackling a bit. And so I made a favorable impression enough to get an invite to camp. So I took about 2 or 3 weeks off to really let my ankle heal up, and started training again and went to national camp, and that was it. I got invited to the next international match, which happened to be Can-Am's up in Saranac Lake, and got my first cap there. So it was my career has been just colored with adversity, and you look at, okay, you played in 3 World Cups, now you're going for your 4th. Wow, what a great career. Yeah, it's been a really great career. But what made the career great wasn't going to the World Cups. It was the journey to get to those places, because they were always filled with challenge, adversity. It was nothing ever easy, you know. And anyone who's played on a national team can tell you that. So, you know, it's a lot of hard work, a lot of determination. But yeah, I made it. So if I made it to the national team with a very bummed ankle, I was determined that it was going to take a hell of a lot to take me out.
Hey everybody, this is just the Bray Train sending out a personal little video diary to all you people out there, where I am going to document me riding most of the way between Singapore and Tokyo for the 2019 Rugby World Cup. Number one is because as part of my business I do Rugby Lovers Guide to Asia. Number two is I want to bring a lot of exposure to the rugby clubs and the rugby NGOs and charities. Also on a personal level, I just want to break the funk I've kind of felt I've been into for the last 10 years.
So for the next 12 months, I poured myself into the Singapore to Tokyo campaign, but it still wasn't enough. I needed help, and it came from Louisiana.
We in Singapore, baby!
Gift from GiftTime Rugby USA is a extroverted tour de force.
Say hi to my people out there.
Which makes up for my social shortcomings.
This place is unbelievable.
No!
It's not just it's like
what's he supposed to do?
Morons, a bunch of morons.
Guys, picture with me. Picture. Australian. G'day, mate. You can use my phone. But what unites us is a hunger for adventure.
Off to KL, Kuala Lumpur.
Yeah! Woo! Gift, where are we?
We're in
Mount Fuji, baby!
Our love of Asian rugby culture.
1, 2, 3, Central!
Yeah!
Rugby is starting to develop here in Cambodia for women as well.
Valkyries, the mighty Valkyries!
And allows us to overcome incredible obstacles.
It's just got so thick. It's just so thick here. Now it's pouring down rain again.
But coming to this Thai-Cambodia border has renewed all the aggression.
So the whole thing's gone buggered. I got hit.
What?
I got tail-ended by a motorbike. I can just feel that knee, that ankle just going in all the wrong directions under the weight of my body. But that doesn't compare to the pain of failure.
I'm dying. Oh, I'm dying.
And that's what I've been worried about this whole time. We're out here, we're running out of energy, we're running out of money, and we're feeling isolated. And yet at that critical moment, friends, family, sometimes complete strangers come on board. Before you know it, we're back in the game. Tokyo, here we come!
Making a comeback. 4 weeks, 2,300 miles, 5 countries.
After all the trials and tribulations, this ride had become deeply personal. All that mattered now was getting to that Rugby World Cup game in Tokyo.
Yeah, buddy. All right. Be easy. Go check out redearthfilms.vhx.tv to get your copy of Singapore to Tokyo any way we can. That's redearthfilms.vhx.tv. Right.
Yeah. So.
And no, and that makes sense. Again, and I keep referring back, but I just love how much it refers back to that work ethic that you gained back at home. And
yep.
you know, you even for that for going through that process. I mean, as crazy and dangerous to your body in the long term as that was, it's like the constant grind was able to keep moving.
Sure.
So you know, within that aspect, though, you know, we're talking women's rugby going into the 90s. So just a quick impression. What is the difference that has been since you started versus what you're seeing now? Because you've had the pleasure of being able to just facilitate yourself in all the generational change in it. And I consider the rugby generation as a shorter gap than normal generations.
Absolutely. Oh my God, the game has evolved, and it's no discredit to any of the athletes and teams I played against. It's always been hard at the national level, right? But I think now your athletes are they're faster, on average. They're stronger because everyone's doing strength and conditioning at that level in either a professional or semi-professional environment. The game has now opened up and recruits crossover athletes. So you got track athletes, you got folks like Nia Tapper that are in the game who are just tremendous forces.
One of my easily favorite players to be coming. One of the most underdogs since UNC. I remember whenever we saw her at UNC, and I think one of my guys did an article on her, but I saw her at UNC and I was like, there's that star process, like there's that person that is going to be a star, and it's just a matter of time.
Absolutely, and even players like Chris Thomas, another underrated, tremendous Cheta Emba, like those back three, they're like a force to be reckoned with.
Exactly.
In at least the 15s, they're all obviously Cheta's a prop in sevens, but those players, they're not. I mean, and the players I look at players like Ashlyn English, who was a force as fullback, during my time. Even going back before me, or Patty Jervey, actually, I had the fortune of playing with her. She's one of those players that you could have taken out and put her in any generation, and she would have just been incredible. Jen Crawford, who a lot of players now don't know, who was just absolutely magical on the field. But it's taking players. There are certain players that are timeless and were timeless. In their in their prime, but the game has certainly changed. It's just stronger. It's so much faster. I mean, my first international match in 7 years was last week against Canada, and it always even between international matches when you're still playing international rugby, that transition period. You have to readjust to it. So it takes you, a few minutes, even in the game, to reacclimate to that pace. So being 7 years removed and going back into what I call the lion's den, it was crazy, It was crazy. And so I got a taste of it, and I was like, okay, I got to do some work, right? I know that in order for me to earn a spot on this World Cup team, I've got to be clinical. I've got to be just brilliant about the decisions I make about my training. I've got to be just on top of my sleep and recovery, because if I'm not going to make this team, because I'm not going to be able to keep up with these players and be able to add value. And so I certainly think that the game has evolved tremendously, and these athletes that are out there now, they have been provided with, a lot more resources than the players in the 90s. And that's a great thing. That's what the players in the 90s have pioneered to create for the players in 2017. And so it's that life cycle, but that's what it should be, right? That's how it should be. These players should be stronger, should be more athletic, because they've been this road that they've been provided with has been built on the backs of all those players from that 91 team, and all those players, in the U.S. club scene that have, sacrificed and made rugby really what contributed to what rugby is today in this country and really in the world.
Man, and that makes sense. I gotta ask, when it comes to all the national players, I always, in other sports, you always feel like there's a club that goes along with it. Like there's the fraternity of players. Like, is there still that aspect from the teams? Again, you have for yourself at minimum 3 teams that you've been a part of, plus the 2-3 World Rugby teams that came prior to when have these coming up. Is there a connection that you guys have that you guys maintain consistently, or is it kind of just like we see you when we see you, and kind of go from there.
You mean the generation now, how they interact? Is that what you're asking?
Well, I'm talking about across all the generations. So like,
Gotcha.
Like whenever they talk like Hall of Fame guys for football, the guys do their cookouts and stuff, and they have their own little meetings and gatherings.
Gotcha.
Is there anything like that connects the national teams together?
Unfortunately, up to this point, there hasn't been. I think that is something that many people want. Like when there is the USA Rugby Trust has this dinner I think they had, the last dinner was in Chicago. I think they had there was a dinner, and there were a number of Eagle alumni that showed up for this. So there is an opportunity for that to happen at events like that. Mm-hmm. I keep in touch, with a number of former Eagles that I have played with, and I've gotten to know a number of the men and male Eagles that I never knew, right? And I think there's a really strong desire for the Eagles to get to know each other because, we've done the same thing, male or female. We've gone through the same process. We've worked, we've dedicated, we've sacrificed. And so there is a sense of sorority or fraternity, brotherhood, sisterhood. It's just there has never been a formal forum to have that type of interaction. But I certainly think that's something that's desired, and I certainly think that's the direction that, and might be a little bit of a teaser, that the U.S. Rugby Trust and U.S. Rugby could possibly head up, even, with the newly formed Players Association and bringing in the alumni. I think that would be a tremendously powerful thing. As far as like club teams and the legacy of club teams, I think that a lot of clubs, they have their old girls and old boys.
Right, exactly.
So they do have that culture. They foster that culture very strongly.
Yeah, and because it's always something that I've always thought, because there's just such you literally have a very small percentage of people who ever will have a chance to play on a national team, let alone being able to play in a Rugby World Cup. Like there's only so much you can do, and there's only so many spots. So regardless of what the result of it is, there's a bubble that's in that you guys can only experience yourselves.
Right.
For you, whenever you first got onto the national team, what was it? What was the feeling for you like? Because obviously you've always been, like you mentioned before, about the journey, but you were able to go from this club level, doing select teams, and then finally got to essentially represent your country for better or worse. You got to represent the country. What was that first moment that you got to, whenever you played as a national team member? What was that like?
Well, looking through the lenses that I was looking at real time during that time, it was exciting. I'd never experienced anything like that, right? So I'm sitting on top of the world. I'm thinking, God, I'm on the U.S. team. This is great. And then my next thought is, because I'm always thinking like a step or two ahead.
Right.
Well, how can we make rugby big? And so what really resonated with me was, number one, this is an honor and a privilege. This is amazing. I feel so fortunate. But then it was like, and how can we take this to the next level? Like, how do we bring exposure, to this sport? How do we market it? How do we get players like me and some of the other teammates, in Nike ads? So I was thinking like,
how do you commercialize this mug?
Yeah, how do we commercialize this bad boy? And so, those were my thoughts then. Now I have a rare, fortunate, opportunity to be able to look at my life real time at that time, and also look back through lenses from experience.
Right.
So, looking back at myself as a 23 or 22-year-old, I think, wow, you took that for granted, right?
Oh,
that was an
man.
opportunity you took for granted, because in looking back on how I felt, I guess I was so focused. And 23, that's what 20-year-olds do, right?
Exactly.
Right? It's that ego. It's that really egocentric age where you're just focused on you. You're focused on what you have to do. And so it's like you think that the world revolves around you,
right?
And it's not a negative thing. It's just it's a product of that age, and especially as an athlete, because all you're thinking about is all that you have to do to be the best you can be. And so looking back, I think a lot about how, wow, I took so much for granted, and just assumed that it was not assumed, I worked hard for everything. But, I always thought, wow, I always made teams, right? Like I was always one of the best players. Now, fast forward to my experience in being in the Olympic pool, training for the Olympics, being the oldest player, to jump into that rat race as well. And knowing going in that my chances were extremely slight to make the team, being on that end of it, never getting selected to travel with the team, not being like the top favorite, it really added some incredible perspective, and it didn't necessarily feel good at the time, but it allowed me to be able to understand what players, when I was in my prime, who weren't selected, who had to just work their butts off, but still for whatever reasons weren't picked.
Right.
It gave me perspective to see, right? Like, wow, this is what it's like, and it kind of came full circle for me. And even now with this team, with this World Cup team, I'm going in a position that hooker is probably the most technical position on the field. You got to throw, you got to strike, you got to be able to scrum. And the throw is so critical, right? Your selection is based on your ability to throw a high percentage ball. And you don't learn how to throw overnight. And so having virtually 7 or 8 months to learn how to throw, in addition to having to keep up, I keep putting myself in these positions of just major challenge.
Right.
But what I get out of it is that, I want to challenge myself. And if I'm out of my league, then it'll show. But if I'm, a contender in it, then I'm going to work and I'm going to push and I'm going to really push the most out of myself. And in that process, I'm going to help someone else grow too. I'm going to push the person above me, and I'm going to definitely motivate the person that may not be at that level yet, like some youngster. So when I look at it now, I'm looking at it from that perspective. I coach at Monroe College, so now that these guys and soon-to-be girls that I'll be coaching know that I'm in the national pool and on the national team, it's a different game for me. It's like, okay, I'm playing for me, but I know these kids are watching me, right? It makes it more real. And so I have to be an example. I have to teach them by virtue of the way that I play, and teach them about how to deal with rejection, how to deal with not making a team, how to deal with not being selected as a starter, and be able to deal with it with class and grace, because I haven't always been able to do that. Right. When I wasn't selected to start, and then Kathy Flores is, I love her. She's one of my favorite. She's probably one of my favorite coaches, right? And a person that I respect so much. But she would make tactical decisions about sometimes how she played me, how she played anyone. And sometimes her tactical decisions would be to play me as a second half player. And that made me crazy because I wanted to be starting. I wanted to be one of the best.
This is where you've naturally been at so long, right?
Right. So I didn't take too well to that, and I didn't take too well to it with even some of the select side teams I played. But that's a part of the process, and you grow. And now I look at how I react when I'm good with being a second half player now, right? Like I want to come in and make an impact, right?
Close the game out.
Yeah, I'm okay with that, right? And I'm good with starting too, right? I'm good with not having to play an entire game, whereas where I used to get really mad when a coach would take me out because I wanted to be on the field. But it just adds perspective for me, and so it's looking at through those lenses real time as a very young player are very different now the way I see the game and the way I see life as it should be, looking at it through these older colored lenses. So.
Look, but that's the pleasure of it. It's almost like taking it's a second journey, like you said. You've had this one journey, and for all intents and purposes, it was a successful journey in terms of doing the work and getting to achieving the goals. But now you have this next side where you get to now do the work, and now you have to determine what are the goals that are being set ahead.
Absolutely.
So you being as being set as an example, there's a lot of things that for me in rugby, I've always noticed that are very dynamic to the growth. I think one of the biggest ones has always been diversity in rugby. I know specifically amongst my friends that are around here who are black and or pretty much not white, and there are some white too, but pretty much not black. Whenever you ask to tell them, you're like, hey, I play rugby. They're like, oh, what? What is that? First, after they go, oh, is it the one with the sticks? And then you're like, no, it's the one that's football and soccer all mixed together.
Right.
You're like, oh, okay, so you don't have any pads. You're crazy. Like that's a crazy white boy sport. As a black athlete, and particularly one in a sport that has not that it's been exclusive to it, but has not been very embraced by the community. Do you feel that there's a responsibility that you have to be able to expand that out? Because as a woman who's playing athletically in alternative sport that people typically would not consider, since there's not really any women's contact sports, do you feel a responsibility of kind of having to put that mantle on? Because for what it's worth, you're really kind of one of the premier OG, black women athletes for rugby, like in the U.S.
Right. I do feel a responsibility, and I'm open and giving to help and spread rugby amongst all people. But there is a calling, there is an allegiance, I feel like, to invite especially the youth level, right? Young kids of color to the sport, because I think that especially in areas where I live in rural area, not rural, but in urban, disadvantaged areas, there's several of those in New York City, right? Like the Bronx, not all the Bronx, but in those areas there are kids, there are young ladies who grew up in difficult environments, and they're trying to figure out a way to deal with all of this aggression and anger that they feel. And they at the same, and we know what sport does for girls, right? How much it builds their confidence, their self-esteem, and it number one, it reduces the probability of these girls, having early pregnancy, and not graduating from high school, not going to college. And so, it's very obvious that a sport like rugby is a perfect thing for a young girl, right? To at least try, right? And there are other sports, but there's something so obviously unique about rugby where you develop this toughness, you develop this grit. And it also it's a sport that requires you have to be smart to play. You can't be, you're just not going to do well and I think everyone has a capacity to be smarter and to push their horizon. So it's not to be exclusive necessarily.
But it's critical thinking.
But it's extremely critical thinking on the fly. Yeah. And so it teaches kids those skills. It teaches young women of color those skills. And it also allows for them to express themselves in a very kind of controlled yet violent way that they need to, right? And so when employed correctly, when done technically, when taught how to play properly, they have that opportunity, I think any kind of physical exertion is going to allow you to just go. And that's the thing about rugby. No matter how hard you work, no matter how hard you run, you got to go back and you got to be able to replicate it. And in 80 minutes, or even in a 14-minute sevens match, it's exhausting to go as hard as you can for 80 minutes or for 14 minutes, right? So either mechanism of rugby that you choose is going to be exhaustive. So, it creates, it's the environment and the culture that is cultivated within the rugby community that I feel is also extremely supportive for, an at-risk, African American or Latina or, just minority female, minority males, Monroe College, right? It's a small private college. They have a campus in the Bronx and a campus in New Rochelle. But the mass majority of students that attend this college are African American or Latino. And a lot of those kids, would probably otherwise not go to college, and so there's a community there that they can go. The school and the staff are extremely dedicated to these young folks, and they're very serious about creating a very challenging environment and bringing on the best people that they can to be a part of their staff and to be a part of their teaching, their lecturing community. And so it's taking these kids and explore these young people, women and men, and bringing them, what they could get at, say, I'm not going to say it, Monroe's not Ivy League, but I think of it as bringing kind of an Ivy League environment and opportunity to kids that may not be exposed otherwise.
Right.
And so, I think it's really important. And part of the reason why I accepted this position at Monroe was because I felt an allegiance to give back to and bring kind of the women of color to the well, right? Let them drink the water. Let them figure it out for themselves. And so, it's a huge part of what I'm doing now and what I plan to do going forward.
No, and I like that. It was like I had the opportunity to go to Thailand a couple months ago. And it was one of the things that I had noticed. I think one of the stories that I had, and I still got to get this video put together. But I was talking to one of the coaches for the Laotian team, a team that not in the largest of minds that I would have ever thought would have had a rugby team, let alone their women's national team. And I was talking to the captain for it, and she was pretty much talking about what you had said, is that development of confidence, the ability to be able to do something that is so untraditional to what she's normally used to dealing with. Right. And it had me thinking where in rugby, the future, in my opinion, the future of rugby has always been based around the concept that what they do with the women's sport is going to be highly determinant on the success that it can do elsewhere. Like the men's is always the men's, but you know what the thing is? With the men's, you have so many sports that gather against that. But within the women's, you have a very unique ability to be able to take advantage of a market that is relatively untouched.
And you're segueing into a point that I wanted to make, and I wanted to definitely get this out there. Yes, rugby is a sport worldwide that has a unique opportunity. And what the U.S. possesses, and I'm a newly elected board member, and one of my missions is to really help bring this and pick up the reins where Pam Kosanke left off, but to really be a huge advocate and activist and pioneer to make rugby equitable, right, in the U.S., to bring some, to bridge the disparity, because there is a disparity between the men's and women's rugby, and to help the U.S. become the mecca for equality in rugby, right? To provide those opportunities. And what has to happen too is there has to be a unique way of marketing women. You can't go about the same process. You can't go about the same channels and mechanisms that men's rugby does, or men's sport in general does. Absolutely. It just doesn't, it's not going to work. And what that hopefully will do, it will encourage and in some way influence world rugby, to take on the same course of action. And they've done some things, right? They've done some things. They're moving in that direction. But for me, it's just not happening fast enough, right? Like it just needs to happen. When you look at and I don't mean to be critical, but if even you look at the World Cup, and the amount of days that are allocated to a World Cup. And I know already the argument is, well, the Women's World Cup doesn't bring in nearly as much money as the men's. Fair enough. But there hasn't been nearly as much energy put into the women's game as there has in the men's. There hasn't been that unique marketing. No one's going out and really working to try to figure out what it is going to be that really markets the women's game, right? What is it that's going to be the hook that pulls in all these corporate sponsors and it gets fans in the stands, and so you've got what the national governing body has to do and what the world governing body has to do. It has to actually recognize this disparity. You take a look at the World Cup for men. Mm-hmm. The men's World Cup lasts over the course of a couple months.
Right, about a month and a half, yeah.
Month and a half, roughly. The women's is 3 weeks.
Right.
So we have to play, in terms of a player welfare, from a player welfare perspective, we're playing every 4 days.
Right.
Which is not enough time to recover.
Right.
It's not enough time to really allow for that athlete to regenerate and come out 100% for that next game. And so just in managing these welfare issues in the women's game, there's got to be change, and there needs to be change going into it's not going to change for 2017, but for sure 2021, there needs to be change.
Right.
There needs to be change in how we talk about rugby. We don't need to talk about, oh, well, that's women's rugby and that's rugby. It's rugby. Rugby is rugby. There's no women's rugby, men's rugby. Rugby is rugby. We play the same game. We play the same amount of minutes. We play in the same types of uniforms with the same size ball on the same size pitch, right? And we acquire the same injuries. So the games are played. Yeah, the women are a lot more technical because there's a slight difference there, but we're playing the same game. So even when talking about World Cup and when, it's like everything you see is advertising for the men's World Cup.
Right.
And you're starting to see more and more for Ireland.
But it's very small. It's still very, very small.
It needs to be twice as much as the men's World Cup. This is what I'm saying. Like you have to bridge the gap first. And it doesn't mean that you prefer one over the other, but you have to acknowledge that there is a deficit.
Right.
And you have to, if you're really looking to shape and change.
Right. You gotta get crazy with it. And honestly, that's one of the things, and to be honest with you, I think that's one of the things that has been dynamically contentious with me when it comes to rugby in the U.S. Not necessarily just U.S. rugby, but USA rugby, but rugby in the U.S.
Yes.
I've always felt that, when it comes to how it's presented, there's a lot of deficits that go along with it. I like the concept that we had mentioned earlier. When we tell somebody, hey, what is rugby? Oh, rugby is compare one sport, compare a second sport, and now we created rugby. So now rugby is not so much the premier definition, it is the sublet of these two other sports that you can say is because they recognize it, but I've never heard anybody go, hey, what's basketball? Man, well, it's like soccer, but instead of you using your feet, you put it into a hoop above the air. Like, there's no division. And when it comes with just how it's all presented, I think there's this traditional playbook. And talking about how, rugby has this opportunity, I've always felt like, and I'm testing the theory myself, obviously, but I've always felt that with rugby, you have an opportunity to win in, 1, the digital game, 2, the equitability game, and 3, the global game. The only sport that really is a high-end sport that has been winning globally is soccer. And it's still really segmented to just the region of Europe for the most part.
Absolutely.
Whereas you have like the NFL, which is by far the richest sport in the world, but knows that it needs to go global, but has a hard time because there's not a transition to it. Also, you have basketball. There's 2 components that go with it. Dynamically different. The rules differ for both the women and the men. The rules differ internationally and such. And obviously with basketball, it built off of single individual stardom.
Absolutely.
NFL built off of TV, MLB built off the stadium experience. So you have this opportunity with rugby to be like, look, it's 2017, and I feel like this is part of the reason why rugby hasn't been able to, at least in the U.S., and you know what, I'll say worldwide, because you know what, if you're not getting the biggest sports market in the world, I still think you're in a deficit. So within rugby, I've always felt, look, it hasn't had the generational opportunity to do what it needed to do, because before, it's either access, which is satellite, which not everybody wants to get. It was equitability, where in every sport there is at least a deficit. We have either women are just becoming refs in it, or just becoming coaches in it, or we have the issue of access, or there's always been something that prevents it, that rugby has always had, but it's never been able to really build upon it.
Right.
So then you take these facets, and now you have an era where you no longer have to have satellite. All you need to have is internet and a strong enough setup, and you can put together a production for cheaper that will be capable to be seen by worldwide mass at any point in time, at whenever you want to do it. The other part is what you said before. You have two sets of women. You have two sets of rugby that are both men and women's rugby that literally follow the exact same rule. There's no handicaps whatsoever. Right. So you have an access that goes for both sides, and then subsequently you have the worldwide access that goes along with it. And Title IX has been amazing for U.S.
Absolutely.
But I feel the problem has always come down to the fact that, especially in the U.S., they use a European style of playbook to win, where it's always been, a club, or you hope to build by expat, or you just have time. Like, really, it's just time. Like, 120 years to be able to do rugby so that you finally can have that. So, within the U.S., I've always believed that, it's a factor of collaboration. It's taking the Southern Hemisphere style, where you develop by the cultural environment that's there. With the reason the All Blacks are probably easily the most casual, observing sports fan who would recognize anything rugby. The haka, which is the most culturally relevant, action for or representation of rugby, is recognized because it is a culturally relevant concept, and America has yet to pull that off. So, for you within the national governing board, and now being in this area where you get to be part of the people that are constantly hated on now. What do you see from these newcomers? Because I know it was like 5 of you that came in, 3 or 5 of you that came in all together, right?
Well, there's 2 of us. Todd Clever and I were elected as the international athlete representatives, and there are 2 board seats that are opening up. Right. So the Congress will essentially, place them at the next Congress meeting, I think coming up in July. So, I know that I was on the Congress before I joined the board. Yeah. And I'm brand spanking new. I haven't even put my feet in the water yet. So, but I know that, there was this effort to move towards much more transparency. And I think that's an absolute must, right? And so I look forward to, adding my expertise from a legal perspective, from a player perspective, because I don't think, I think that having a voice from a current player perspective is really important, and just, making a difference, right? Like, really connecting, because I feel like I'm still a part of the Congress on so many levels. And, and so the Congress is, the relationship between the board and the Congress is that actually the Congress puts the board at work, right? They select the board members. So Congress is really kind of the overall boss. Right. The board kind of falls under that. But, it's to get in there and make a difference. It's to get in there and share. There's always 2 sides to every coin, but of course, I've got to find out and figure out and fight the battles and fight the battles that are going to be more aligned with my mission, right? And so, I have every expectation of affecting change on the board. I think that they're moving in that direction. I think that, coming up for the World Cup in 2018 in San Francisco, what the U.S. is doing is they're bringing all teams together. Men and women are staying in the same hotels. There's no separate fields, separate hotels, separate amenities. Everyone's equal. So I think that's kind of a statement that the USAR board is making, that USA Rugby is making to the world, to say, look, you're coming to the U.S., this is the home of the, although it's really not equal here,
but you know what? Sometimes you got to put up a little bit of a shade so that you eventually...
Exactly, but rugby is attempting to make it that way. And
exactly.
So you gotta praise the good things that are happening, and you just got to keep working at the things that need to change. And so that's the mission. That's the mission.
Yeah, I guess what I was trying to say is I can't wait to see that American stamp, that says this is our identity. It's still rugby, but this is our identity of rugby. It's not an expat version. It's not a South Pacific light. It is, this is what we do. This is our confidence, and then present from there.
Absolutely.
Kind of just last questions. As you've, and you mentioned this a little bit, as you've moved into this more premier role, and you again take on more responsibilities, what is it that you look for, at least at maybe not so much a national, but what do you look for from the participants of rugby, whether fan or player? What do you hope that they will continue to do, or they should do, to be able to continue to help develop that game, now that you get the coach, the player, the veteran player, the national governing board member, and etc., from that perspective?
Yeah, it's just to keep, uplifting the name, keep coming to games, get out to support both national teams and local teams when you can. Like, support your teams, support the women's team, support the men's team. Do what you can just to be a model person. I mean, I think at the end of the day, when you're a model person and you're striving to be a really good human being, it's hard to go wrong, right? And it transcends into every part of your life. And so, utilizing social media, subscribing to the rugby channel. I mean, I know it's $5 a month, right? Mm-hmm. So subscribe. It's $5 a month. That's one beer less that you should drink a month for most of the fans.
You have expensive beers, by the way.
I don't drink, so that tells you a lot. Right? That's a really, you could give up a half a six-pack or whatever, right? But supporting the sport, right, in any positive way possible, and honestly, getting involved, right? Like, every person that's sipped is a USA Rugby member. Right. So get involved. Ask questions. Ask questions of the national governing body. If there's something that concerns you, ask questions. Demand answers and transparency, because what that does is, for a strong person and for a strong community, a group of people, it challenges them to be on their game, to be on their A game. For someone who's not strong and is just trying to, milk the system for their own personal gain, then they're not going to like that. And those aren't the people we want there anyway. So challenge, but also be ready to be challenged and to give more, right? Support the sport. Just support the sport. Watch it when it's on television. Educate people in the general public, and always just, be the best representative of the game that you can, right? Be a good human being, don't make bonehead decisions.
Respect it. Maybe just a little bit, just a tad bit.
Respect yourself, right? So, that's what I have to say.
That's awesome. Phaidra, I could talk rugby to you for so long.
Absolutely.
But I want to thank you again for just taking the time. I know, again, within your busy schedule, it's hard to find the moments, but I really do appreciate it.
Absolutely, and I'd love to talk to you again whenever you have the time and want to engage.
All right, I appreciate it. Yo, big shout out. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to listen. Of course, and always a big thanks to Phaidra. And you know, guys, keep up. You guys can still find her. Again, PSK Collective. Check out the stuff. Women's apparel, women's sport apparel for women, because it's kind of redundant for me to say it, but sports apparel for women of all sizes and kinds, and a big advocate and activist across the board. Yo, you guys are gonna love it, and definitely check out some of our other podcasts. Robbie Owens we had last week, aka Squid Rugby, a great show we had with him. Before that, we had Karima Prince, one of the co-founders of Prairie View A&M Women's Rugby, aka the very first HBCU women's rugby team of all time. We had the great Akinola Raymond of New York, Rugby United New York, and the great TikTok and Instagram social media star. We had Kirill Guthrie, president of the James G. Robertson and Pat Sullivan Foundation, working to create HBCU rugby programs, one program at a time, and helping to fund it out. We've had other greats, Erica Mori, former Italian women's rugby player and World Rugby Cup alumni, Nicolette Pantor of Trinidad and Tobago, Jess Nielsen, Keisha Ann Downs, vice president for Jamaica Rugby Union. We had Adam Milby, president of the Philippines Rugby Union, Warren Mullis and Preston Thompson of American Rugby Pod. You guys gotta love them. Tozan Tutatanwe, Gabby J. Pellegrini, Victor Encima, and Leonardo Crema of Curitiba Rugby. Got Ann Unwoosery of Black Girls Ruck Podcast. Yo, so much. Emilio Luciano, World Rugby referee and the administrator for the Ivy League Rugby Union. Coma Gandhi Fishbin, part of the USA Rugby Board of Directors. We've had so many guests. Naya Capper, Chetta Emba, Phil Field, Blaine Scully. Just so many guys. You guys have Freddie Henry Ajuda of Nigeria Rugby, Pat Evans of Front Office Sports, Chisei Belu of Pedal Lake. We have gotten amazing guests that you guys definitely want to go back and listen if you haven't had a chance. And if you have, definitely listen to it again, because there's nothing wrong with getting it 2 or 3 or 4 times after. But most importantly, guys, I want to thank you, and I hope that I hope you're happy, I hope you're healthy, and I hope that you absolutely know that you are highly favored. Talk to you next time.